Hi, I'm Ann Rieselbach, the League's Program Director. Welcome to today's celebration of the publication Young Architects 22 Value, which documents the work and ideas of the 2020 winners of the Architectural League Prize for Young Architects and Designers, David Eskenazi, Garrett Ricciardi, and Julian Rose, Leslie Locke and Sasa Zivkovic, Isaac Michan Daniel, Evie Dimatopoulou, and Jeffrey Kolb, and Luis Beltrán de Rio, García, and Andrew Sosa Martínez. All of the firms will be taking part in today's presentations and discussion, and you can find more details about the competition, including biographical information about the winners, on the League's website. They will be joined by Kutan Ayata, Mira Henry, and Kevin Hirth, the 2020 League Prize Committee members and past competition winners who drafted the original competition theme and shaped today's event. They will open with further insight about their prescient theme issued in the fall of 2019, which after describing the contemporary state of political and social precariousness, when all cultural value sets seem publicly permissible, they asked entrants to consider how notions of value operate in their work. And needless to say, we had no idea how much these questions would be amplified during the months to come. We asked the 2020 winners to use this opportunity to revisit their initial responses to the theme, how the rapidly shifting social and political landscape of that memorable spring and summer year reshaped their priorities and may have impacted their League Prize presentations and installations, and for that matter, how or if their impact continues to shape their work today. Following the presentations, there'll be time for discussion, first with the League Prize Committee and then with the audience. So please post your questions in the Q&A session. And since this is indeed a book launch, the team at Oro has provided a 30% discount code that will be posted in the chat section during the lecture. Before we begin, a few thanks are due. First to the 2020 program sponsors, Hunter Douglas Architectural, Rachel Juglow, and Tischler & Son. And the publication was also supported in part by public funds from the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs in partnership with the City Council. And a special thanks goes to Gordon Goff and the team at Oro Editions, who co-published this series. On the editorial side, this publication was guided by consulting editor Andrea Momfried, designer Jenna Schur, and realized through the work of managing editor, the League's program manager, Rafi Lehman. Thanks.
As always, thank you really for everything, Anne. And hello, everyone. I'm Kevin Hirth. Along with Mira and Kutan, I would like to take a moment to thank you all for coming and to thank the League for the opportunity to participate in this event. Our congratulations are with the 2020 League Prize winners who are here to celebrate, and we are here to hear from today. The excellence of the book that you've thoughtfully produced is indicative of the incredible futures that you all have ahead of you. We look forward to seeing some of these trajectories taking shape here today. Receiving the Architectural League Prize, an important touchstone in the first decade of framing a practice, is as much a ground for reflection as it is recognition. Its particular structure, responding to a theme and jury through a collection and contextualization of one's own work, provides an established venue for understanding what collects an early body of work into a cohesive statement. This process inevitably places that body of work into dialogue with the preoccupations of the discipline in its present. Taking place in the committee, we were asked to assemble the framework for the 2020 League Prize program, having received the award ourselves over the previous few years. It's our pleasure now to take a moment to introduce today's event, one that is reflective on the then and now of a consequential confluence of thoughts and works around 2020's Architectural League Prize prompt value.
Thanks, Kevin. So as Anne had mentioned at the beginning, in August 2019, we were assembled as a team, Kutan, Kevin, and me, as the three-person committee to develop this next theme. And at the time, we didn't really know each other that well, and we were all living in different cities. And so we first gathered on Skype. And over the course of 3 weeks or more, we debated back and forth about language and indeed about values, again, over phone calls and shared Google Docs. And, you know, we were following on the heels of the year before, which the theme was just, and there was already a sense of rupture, right? There was already evidence that working in a paradigm of autonomy was over. And so with the theme value, we wanted to continue to poke at that entanglement of politics, economics, and aesthetics. So to question the intersection of the social and the formal, we wanted to incite discourse. Little did we know that the remote collaboration that we enjoyed as a novelty at that time would define the next 2+ years for everybody. And little did we know that the sense of rupture that was perhaps latent for some would overflow so exquisitely as to challenge and shake the roots of our discipline.
Here we are where we started, I guess, in boxes. It has been evident for some time that a singular gravitational pull no longer governs the architectural discipline. We seem to be orbiting around multiple centers, moving in and out of different force fields of influence, crises, potentials with varying durations of focus. The emerging challenges of every evolving context with their social, political, racial, economical, medical, and environmental realities profoundly impact our collective as architects as we try to define and redefine our agency in the world. The reality is that our disciplinary collective reflects the culture at large, which finds expressions in atomized manners across a range of mediums as micro-constituents in an accelerating, ever more politically polarized and complex world. Whether our experiences through the pandemic, the awakening following George Floyd and Black Lives Matter protests, emerging social justice initiatives, climate crisis realities will establish a persistent umbrella of a singular force field is yet to be seen. How our values might have shifted through the events of recent past and how they will fully influence our various outputs are yet to be seen. What is critical at this juncture in our discipline is to be able to find enough overlaps and critical intersections in our divergent trajectories of thinking, teaching, and practicing in order to build new discourse. The make of this League Prize committee members, the make of the jury, and finally the prize winners reflect this apparent divergence in the discipline. What we hope to hash out today is to locate any productive overlaps, interests, common or uncommon grounds in the pre- and post-pandemic trajectory of the prize winner designers' discourses.
And with that, we'd like to take this opportunity to turn the mic over to the 6 incredible participants in the 2020 Architectural League Prize program.
Hi, everybody. My name's David Eskenazi. Nice to see everybody after a few years. I lead a practice here in Los Angeles. It's called d.esk. Since the last few years since winning the award, I'd say that my practice has really kind of been trying to introduce a desire for more intimate relationship to buildings into my work. And it's been a desire that originated certainly during the pandemic. And it was a thought that maybe social forms and architectural forms might enter into a new kind of creative contract, one that might bring an intimate closeness to buildings that engage the field's ongoing ethical maintenance. The next slide, please. So this began with a bathhouse proposal that I showed during our Lead Prize exhibition in 2020 called Inhale, Exhale, Sag, Flex. It's a proposal for a temporary demountable bathhouse that brings exercise and self-care into contact with building maintenance and cleaning. There's 2 buildings, one that we were calling Sag and one Flex. They're made of different materials and house cleaning programs and relaxation programs, respectively. Next. So we were working before the pandemic with an organization that was looking at lots owned by the city of Los Angeles that introduced something pleasurable and of utility to different neighborhoods. We were interested in materials that are low tech, cheap and transportable, things like building paper and rubber water bladder systems. We like these because we imagine they need to be maintained, they give off heat, and maybe on certain days they'd absorb or repel water. Next. So these are some of the details of the 2 buildings. If one is rubber, the other is Tyvek paper. If one window is rigid, the other is flexible. Next. As the paper dirties, the roll of paper is pulled down to replace aging materials. We imagine that it would be what it would be like to attach or detach a gutter from a from a rubber water bladder, and design systems that would easily replace each of these pieces. Next. On the ground floor, you can see on the left side are kind of cleaning programs in the building that we were calling Flex. On the right side of this plan were all of the bathing programs in the building that we're calling SAG. Next. On the second floor, there's a sauna on the left and this large pool on the right. Next. The building itself begins to inhale with warm water and steam programs on the left side. So everything is kind of breathing outwards, and SAG with large bodies of water on the right, which is enclosed with replaceable pieces of paper. Next. As we developed the project, of course, we were remote and doing things virtually. So we made a lot of images and we became interested in images that felt like portraits of architecture, devoid of people, but full of traces of their activities. Things that bring viewers of an image into a feeling of intimacy with the building. So things like this. Next. Next. And so the proposal was demountable. We designed the structure as a flat pack fold up system and proposed plumbing and electrical systems that be encased in off the shelf plumbing. Next. Those water bladders I mentioned would store cold and hot water. The hot water bladder stacks upwards while the cold sags downwards. Next. Restrooms and changing rooms are enclosed in latch curtains. Next. The building is wrapped in many layers, almost like clothing. Next. Next. And the second project I'll show is something we've been doing since 2020. I've been engaged in maybe more familiar forms of practice since then, and in particular, have developed a few additional dwelling unit proposals that have lately become the site of young architectural experiments in Los Angeles. I'll show you one of them, which is our proposal, Le Caboose. This was a project for an 800 square foot ADU in the back end of the existing duplex. In many ways, it's a very typical Los Angeles scene. We find a palm tree lined street, mix of single family and small multi-unit housing separated by walls and fences, where the backside of the property abuts a large self-storage facility with mountains beyond. Next. So Le Caboose takes its name from its form. It's the last small puzzle piece to fill in a residential plot. ADUs are often as expensive to build as regular houses, so we've been exploring cheaper material systems that could be deployed. In this project, we're working with exposed interior walls and off-the-shelf material products. Next. So we design things that move and readjust. This is the entry where the window frame on the right readjusts. The kitchen hides all the way in the back behind a roll-up panel, and the living space bleeds out. Next. Next. These are some of the studies of the panel systems and electrical systems we were designing. We're thinking about intimacy through adjustments in a small space. So the closet, kitchen, bathroom are enclosed in roll-up panels and nearby pulleys. Next. Next. And lastly, we imagined what kind of close encounters someone might have with a house. So seeing through a window to a stair. Next. Peeking inside towards a TV that's on upstairs. Next. You might study the scene of an outlet. Next. Or the view down from the bedroom loft at night, reflecting the scene below. Thanks.
All right, I'm Julian Rose, one half of Formlessfinder. I'm gonna treat you to the first 3 minutes, and then Garrett is gonna take over. So to begin, just a very quick word on how we took on value. The prompts did very provocatively, we thought, present this idea of a kind of value crisis in contemporary architecture, and we thought a lot about how we address that condition in our own practice. And what we realized is that we agree that that's the case, but we think that it tends to make people assume that there is no core value, or as was mentioned, that there's no single gravitational pull. And we actually think there is. It's just that that's market value, which in a way is even worse. So while architects are kind of arguing about different value systems, architectural value has essentially become reduced to market value. So what we try and do to address that is to kind of short circuit market value system by working a lot with waste or raw materials, things that are sort of free or non-commodities, or things that we think more broadly as formless. So the first project I'm going to run through is called Tent Pile. Next. This was the first chance we got to really test some of these ideas in reality. We were invited to do a pavilion for Art Basel Design Miami Beach. And so the brief was to create a large pavilion that had to be completely built and disassembled within 1 week. Next. So we thought about a kind of local typology, and we got really interested in sand as a material. And one of the things we discovered in our research is that there's actually 50 billion tons of sand used every year, and 90% of that goes to the construction industry. That's besides air and water, that's the most used resource on the planet, but this isn't something that architects are really thinking about. Next. So we thought of actually trying to use sand as the primary construction material for the pavilion, but to use it in an unfixed way. So the idea is it would be totally temporary and there wouldn't really be any construction costs or any demolition costs. We would just literally pile it up. So we thought about these sort of two typologies. One was a kind of natural ecological typology of the pile, which you can see here on the right. The other one was a truss, and specifically a hurricane truss, which is a very common structural component, especially in Miami because it's a hurricane zone. So we kind of looked at the formal affinities between these two and thought of essentially stacking them. Next slide, if you can. Sorry, Rafi. Yeah, thanks. And then another thing we tried to engage, as we do in a lot of our projects, is the kind of ecological or performative benefits of that. So something that kind of came out of studies with our engineering team was that actually the pile was so large that it became a very effective thermal mass cooling. So what we did is we basically created half a pile with a retaining wall and a cantilevered roof, and then used the thermal mass cooling to kind of cool the sheltered space we created. Next. So this is a detail. This is what we call the edge detail, and we really like, again, this idea of a formless or kind of like uncontrolled structure. Next. This is the truss detail. So this is kind of where we saw the two components of the project really all coming together. You have the retaining wall, the milled aluminum truss, and the sand itself. Next. And then this is just a snapshot of the trusses actually being milled. So because we were using aluminum, we basically were able to mill them out of solid sheets and then actually recycle all of the scraps. So it's something that, again, seemed like it might be an inefficient way of approaching it, actually became very efficient. And then actually, Rafi, if you could just flip through the next three. Yeah, and then just basically what we want to close out. Actually, one more, Rafi. Thank you. So just to close on this project, this is what we see as trying to kind of reveal the potentials of the formless in a small way, where we called it kind of a clean side and a dirty side, and they were both social, but in different ways. So on one side of the retaining wall, we had the kind of more traditional pavilion lounge space where, fair guests, collectors, et cetera, could hang out and make cell phone calls. But then actually it was really gratifying to see how much people actually use the other half of the sand pile, and that became a kind of surprise social space that they're there. So Garrett, I'll pass it off to you for the final 3 minutes.
Great. Next slide. Perfect. We want to end by sharing a work in progress that shows that a new scale of research and building our office is beginning to explore. Just about the time we received the League Prize, we were asked by the curators of the Kuwait Pavilion for the 2020 Venice Biennale, which became the 2021 Biennale, to envision a new strategy for archaeological exploration and infrastructure development in Kuwait's vast hinterland. Next slide, Rafi. Here, a map of the hinterland calls out different hotspots for land use and conflict. In a nutshell, the two maps shed light on the cultural and spatial cliche that the desert is a vast and featureless landscape. Next. Just an installation shot at the Arsenale, and then a number of the sites of conflict that were explored by numerous architects. Next slide. What is also unique about Kuwait is the country's singular ability in the region to pioneer a new approach for preserving its ancient sites. This is simply because none has been unearthed until the last half century. Unlike areas of North Africa or the greater Middle East, Kuwait was largely passed over in the belief that there was literally nothing below ground. Beyond the weight of this specific colonial history, literally layered on top, is the more recent history of the Iraq-Kuwait War and some of the most spectacular contemporary infrastructure projects on the planet. Pictured here on the right is the North Bay Causeway. Next. The specific series of sites we've been working with were selected in response to a recent archaeological crisis, when in 2019, construction of the new North Bay Superhighway was halted by the discovery of a major archaeological site below ground. And although it was widely assumed that that new construction is in direct conflict with historic preservation, we see inversely an opportunity. Next. Our design for a series of linked highway archaeological research centers is based on that fact, that in terms of the actual material and process, archaeology and construction are nearly identical. They both begin with holes in the ground, and they both involve moving massive quantities of earth. These diagrams, left and right, study excavation and archaeology. What I think we're particularly interested in is that they're almost indistinguishable in their drawing types. One can't even tell the difference. Next slide. Shown here in the catalog from the biennial is a series of core drills commissioned from the Department of Transportation from various construction sites along the highway. Next. Just an installation view at the Arsenale. Next. A still from an 8-minute film that we produced with the help of the Architecture League for the exhibition. Next. And a second film still showing the descent from above grade to the museum access below. Next slide. And one final image, a bird's eye view. We are after something threefold. A building that is literally equal in its expression as infrastructure and architecture. Two, a relatively straightforward value proposition that if one could theoretically build cultural institutions at the cost of a highway, let's say $9 a square foot instead of $1,000 a square foot, you could make a compelling argument for a new kind of distributed cultural institution. And three, that there is perhaps a different type of preservation that can negotiate past, present, and future without compromise. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sasa Zivkovic, and I'm a co-principal at HANA. And together with my colleague, Leslie Locke, we'll be presenting two projects today. In reflecting on the theme of today's talk, Value Then and Now, we revisit the initial response of our League Prize submission titled Invaluable Propositions. Next. We framed our work as a series of design propositions that aim to advance disciplinary dialogue, and in addition, through ground-up digital design and fabrication processes, generate value by facilitating new material methods, tectonic articulations, environmental practices, technological affordances, and forms of sustainable construction. Next. Using a project from the competition portfolio as a springboard, the Ashen Cabin establishes two material narratives and mediates our applied design research as a critical practice. Next slide. In the first material narrative, the project aims to reveal 3D printing's idiosyncratic tectonic language by exploring how the layering of concrete and the act of corbelling can suggest new strategies for building. Next. The second material narrative is informed by a key environmental crisis in North America, where the emerald ash borer threatens to eradicate most of the 8.7 billion ash trees in North America. Next slide. As a reference, almost every 10th tree in New York State is an ash tree. The EAB infestation is a huge environmental problem and also a climate risk. So challenging preconceived notions about material standards in wood, Ashen Cabin utilizes infested wood for its envelope, which unfortunately is widely considered as waste. Next slide. Infested ash is often comprised of mature growth, including many trees with irregular trunk and fork geometries. And while such trees could be used for construction, they are often regarded as economically unvaluable, as they cannot be processed by regular sawmills. Next slide. So by implementing robotic-based fabrication technology, we can transform these irregularly shaped waste wood pieces into an abundantly available, affordable, and also morbidly sustainable building material. Next slide. Using a robotic arm with a custom bandsaw end effector, we can slice irregular tree logs into naturally curved boards and then strategically assemble those boards to form different surface conditions. Next slide. This as a process then informs the design of the building from log to form and vice versa. Next slide. So the curvature of the wood is strategically deployed to highlight moments of architectural importance, such as windows, entrances, roofs, drain scuppers, or canopies. Next. No longer bound to the paradigm of timber standardization, this project revisits woodcraft and design based on organic, found, and living materials. Next. So this small cabin tells many stories and combines a variety of fabrication methods, material applications, geometries, and types of construction.
The shifting in social and technological landscapes in recent years have continuously prompted us as designer, how can we further critically engage with the issues of new construction technology, social impact, and environmental stewardship in our design processes? So both in practice and research, we persist to explore new forms of making to utilize these untapped forest resources. From developing robotic curving techniques for lightweight timber frame in the Unlocked Pavilion and Unlocked Tower, to board lamination using mixed reality tools to reduce material usage in the hollow wall installation. These new material tactics are cataloged in our 2021 NISCA Architecture and Design Independent Project Grants titled On Ashes, Design Strategies for Decaying Ash Tree Populations. Next. With our continuing design research and 3D printed construction, we seek to scale up to address issues of housing. House of Course, a project which is currently under construction, is a house designed with the objective of developing a 3D printed construction system that could be scalable and applicable for multifamily housing. Next. As a prototype for a scalable modular design that integrates 3D printing with wood framing, the project is the first two-story 3D printed building in the US and highlights the exciting design potential for mass customized architectural components for hybrid building structures. Next. The project is also a continuation of our body of work that questions what is the architecture of 3D printed concrete, and how can materiality and the fabrication opportunities and constraints of the tools inform our design? Next. House of Course manifests the idiosyncratic architectural tectonics and design expression of the printing process. Next. Highlighting its potential for spatial and structural customization. Next. And integrated building envelope systems. Next. The design is conceptualized as a series of 6 printed cores which form poche that contains functional spaces and stairs. Next. The spatial cores are connected by framing and glazing to produce an architectural alternation of concrete and framed interiors. Next. And on-site testing was an important step to calibrate material behavior within the local climatic context. We used this step to fine-tune print paths, test various degrees of turning radii, and explore how a line of concrete can terminate itself to refine the design. Next. This has been a 3-year team effort led by Hannah in collaboration with Perry 3D Construction, CIVE, and various building industry partners. Next. In the various aspects of this project, from the overall spatial configuration to the scale of architectural detailing, such as the corbel stepping as an architectural motif to generate shelving and openings, were informed by the fabrication logics of 3D printed concrete. To conclude, these design efforts and propositions aim to increase the impact and the applicability of novel material and building methods. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Michan from Michan Architecture. I'm happy to be here and see everyone. I have a practice in Mexico City, and it's basically next, please. We basically work in multiple types of projects, programs, and multiple type of commissions. In retrospect, when I see our work at the beginning, I think we were trying to push a completely autonomous project, more based on maybe concerns that I find were disciplinary. And the way it has developed, I think it's the way I see the value of architecture, at least for me, is that when it started clashing with the contingencies of the everyday, of the site, of client, of economics, and all these contingencies that we know. At the beginning, I was trying to fight them and have like a pure architecture, but then we realized that this negotiation And this intersection created more exciting hybrids that at the end relate to different concerns, programs, social, political, and economical. Can you, next please? So also when started working closely with material, we realized that this was a cycle that could go back. Working with the material could be a way of actually conceptualizing the project differently and taking a part of the material as a primary approach of the project. And I'm not saying this as a way of thinking a project top down or bottom up, but it was a way of moving between those concerns and being a bit like trying to sometimes be structured, sometimes to be ornament, and bringing it back to the conceptual. So it was a cycle that I found it interesting, and it was discovered organically through the working process that we've been working. Next, please. This is a project that we did in Mexico City. It's in the southern area of the city. It's a collective housing. And usually for us, the problem of collective housing is that how do you maintain a unity, but at the same time keep singularity for users and for everyone. So this project, next please, it's basically in an area that is growing and developing. This is the site, and we took an L-shaped scheme with 2 bars. This was to increase the potential of views, orientations, and have better living areas. Next, please. Then the plan, we see that we have a central patio, central garden, I'm sorry, and the 2 bars don't look at each other. So we have, next please, different type of units, 1, 2, and 3 bedrooms, all with like taking into account the different users that would inhabit the places. Next, please. Then here we see like the trajectory from right to left when you approach the building from the street, in the middle, and then the intersection of these two bars that don't touch each other create this nice tension between the building. Next, please. Then the side facade on the bar that faces the street has this concrete wall that appears to have this vanishing effect for corridor and for services such as bathrooms and kitchens. This vanishing effect creates like this solidity. Next, please. But then when you go to the interior, it has these bridges and these voids that have a contrast between the outside and the inside of the building. Next, please. Then this project is a project that we've been working on from the last year. It's a competition on Bosque de Chapultepec, on the biggest natural forest in Mexico City, Chapultepec. It's a competition that we won with Parabase and Taller Entorno. And this is a kind of following the trajectory of our work, but I would say different. Next, please. Because it's a public project, it's a competition we've been working on for competitions for some time. But in this one, we took an approach of basically, this slide explains the whole project, which is respect the pre-existence of the site, then use the existence, which is basically land. And within that, create all these strategies, either for generating the buildings, the pavilions, or for generating multiple scenarios. The competition asked for a scenic pavilion. What we did is split the program into 3: cafeteria, scenic pavilion, and rehearsal. Next, please. Then these references, we're very interested in Robert Smithson and this land earth work, which basically the act of doing something becomes the project itself. Next, please. This is basically the aerial view with the 3 pavilions scattered around the plot rather than one building. This was the approach to have a less impacted building in this natural area. Next, please. view from above. Next and last one. Next, please. Sorry. And then here we can see this was the first building. They asked for one building. When we split it, we did this strategy to have a more subtle buildings that would have less impact. And by that, we hid the services and the back of house in the hills, and then the roof on top. I think my time is up, so maybe we can go to the next office, which is Vrtical, I think. Sorry, it's new affiliates.
No worries, Isaac. Hi everyone, I'm Joffer.
Hi everyone, I'm Evie. We're both new affiliates at Vrtical.
So this is the point at which we say like we probably did the wrong assignment for today's grouping. I think we were gonna maybe approach the conversation a bit differently, but it's so great to see everyone's projects beforehand. So I guess maybe we can start by talking a little bit like Julian and Garrett did about the kind of meaning of value to us. And, you know, I think I mean, really, first off, thank you to the League, both for the award, but also for kind of stretching out the award over the course of several years. There's something both kind of surreal about it, but it's actually really nice to keep revisiting and to kind of keep reconnecting with the other winners. So we're really appreciative of that. So today we're going to be looking just at this one video of our project Testbeds. This is a video that was made by the Museum of Modern Art, where Testbeds is currently up on display until the end of July. Anyone who's coming through New York should go and see it. And for us, I mean, I think when we applied for the League Prize, we did it with a number of projects that together in a kind of constellatory way spoke to our interests in value. And value, now that we've won the award, we can sort of say like, you know, without trying to sound like we're answering a brief, value has always been really fundamental to how we conceive of our work. Questions of economic value, of sociocultural value, of anthropological value, we're always trying to tease these out. And far before this word was sort of introduced to us by the League, the year of the prize, we'd thought and written and talked a lot about it. So it felt like a really kind of appropriate moment for us. Testbeds, in a way, is not the only project that we feel articulates this within the kind of our work, but one that we feel like kind of encapsulates a lot of our responses to it, the kind of layers of value that we felt like were really important to address. So for us, this project is fundamentally about a kind of ethics of reuse, coupled with a kind of a way of intervening architecture into broad capital flows, how architecture is financed, how development works in New York specifically, which is where the project exists, and how we can sort of tap into that by reassessing systems of value in order to instrumentalize them for different architectural and design purposes. So for us, this meant basically taking pieces of high-end development and moving them away from areas of concentrated economic, basically investment in the city into disinvested communities as a kind of Trojan horse to bring money with them. So in this case, this large set of 4 concrete panels and a large window, an 11 by 6 foot window, came from a Tribeca condominium tower, which basically every unit sells for over $10 million. We were gifted this mock-up by the developer, along with a kind of promise of financing the project. So basically by taking their piece of trash, essentially, we could bring it to a community that was looking for a structure through the Parks Department and have them build it. Evie, maybe you want to talk more about the structure itself.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in and maybe take a slight step backwards to say we always applied for the League Prize, and it was always such an exercise for us to go back and look at the work of a year or 2 years and kind of try to make sense of it. And it made a lot of sense the year we won the award, but we love that we keep doing this. We keep looking back. And since when we applied, we had, even in the book, we had the renderings of the structure and the sort of the imaginary was there. And it took a few years where our role, our expertise, and the value we brought into the project was actually to imagine sort of new kinds of synergetic relationships between actors that don't necessarily overlap within the New York City kind of design construction life. We should say a couple of acknowledgements that this is a project that we've conceived of and worked on together with our close collaborator and architecture historian Samuel Stewart Halaby. So it's a team project, and that the video is made by Hudson Lines. I wonder if we might maybe take a jump instead of talking about the project itself and talk a little bit about where we're at in life and in practice right now. Interestingly, since the awards, truly even at the award or the making the book, we kept promising people for many years. So we're like, this is our project, this is testbeds, this is what mock-ups are, this is what community gardens are, this is why we imagine that there is a way for the two to coexist and exchange resources and kind of find hidden value in each other's kind of ways of being. But we were always like, we're so close, we're going to build it. And I think we're both so excited to be speaking from a place where this is finally built and not only just exists as a construction, but actually people have built lives around it, which has always been important to us. So the structure we co-designed with the folks you see in the video, the leadership of the garden, we're just like, arrived there when they were just getting off the ground. We were introduced to them by our other partner, the Department of Parks and Recreation in the city. And we sort of imagined, or they imagined, and we tried to put shape into it. We wanted to host multiple events. This building. I think we're at time, so we'll pass it on to Vrtical.
Hello, everyone. So, meanwhile, sharing. Thank you, Rafi, Andrew, and Luis from Vrtical. It's really great to be here once again to talk about value. Next. Next. There are going to be a lot of nexts. But we gave this little prefix to value, which would be revalue, and which takes us actually to existence, which is a constant idea that has been going on our projects since the beginning. But I would even say more and more with the years, and especially in Mexico City. Next. Yeah, there you go. Thanks. So the thing is that, for instance, this is the artisan market that we already talked about in the 2020 prize, and in which actually we recover existing walls and foundations, and the exercise was more about to bring these trusses and skylights and magnify the light in order to have new life in the interior, new ways of inhabiting. Next. And then we have this kind of projects, which is Melchor Ocampo 38, 1940 building, original from Luis Barragán and Max Cheto. Actually, the first building that Barragán did in Mexico City. And of course, the exercise was much more about trying to be super respectful, but then again, and not finding solutions and trying to reinterpret a language and a whole time in Mexico City. Our exercise was actually to be not noticed, which is actually something very fun if you give some importance to that. Next. And and this is two houses and a studio in Chimalistac. This is actually a new old project. And this is a huge house in the barrio of Chimalistac. And actually our client needed to redensify that huge house into two houses and one studio. But here the exercise was a bit more technical and a lot of fun, because it was more about demolishing. And by demolishing, sometimes, the slabs you get to create double heights or new windows or new entrances of lights or even new courtyards. Next. But then you have this, left this really kitsch staircase with a terrible ornament. But once again, if you pay attention afterwards, you get to notice that there used to be from before a really nice proportion for the staircase. And for us, the beautiful part of this is that when you start articulating with existence, even though it's not a Luis Barragán building, you will start noticing that there is always something to put attention to or to recover, or that afterwards we'll speak about the previous existent place. Next. Next. So this is House Anaya, Casa Anaya, and this is a very, very small project that we actually have. You can take a look at these old plans. Next. But in which we actually started to develop this really nice code in which blue was demolition, in this case to articulate and make much more open spaces. But also in the first floor, demolition becomes skylights that give new light and new articulation to the way this house is inhabited. Next. And of course, like you have green areas that have tension, and the renovation of these ones, for instance, the one in the front, which used to be a garage. Unfortunately, this place does not receive cars anymore. So it is a really nice patio. Next. And for our code, of course, new materiality will be in red. So you have what we keep in black. Next. So we get to have this really terrible river stone walls, but then again, this speaks of a certain time in the city, and of course, this wall used to speak to the old household, to our client, and say like, this is the house of the grandfather. And it reminds them something. So on right, you can actually see that if you are sensitive enough, you will see that it relates to the new language and it speaks of the past. Next. And next. So we just start having these new boundaries, and where you take a look at the proportion, and as I told you, these new tensions with the gardens and the limits. Next. And for instance, some of these limits, we change the way in which we open the frames, for instance, but we keep the materiality, or we keep this horizontal modulation, being once again sensitive enough. Next. But this is great, connected the old kitchen and the new kitchen, which actually connects really well with the courtyards. Once again, the most important is that this gives new life or a new way for all places to be inhabited without erasing the whole memory. Next. So some views of the internal courtyard and this tension in between spaces, these new columns that actually sustain the whole structure that we changed. We take off these bearing walls. Next. The space sometimes speaks for itself. Very flexible. Next. Okay. And then we go up with these skylights, and as I told you, we articulate the upper part, but probably we can go to the last slide. Next. Yeah, there you go. So even if we find a methodology and this nice drawing that we did trying to overlap things, it's of course, this is a representation that will not work for construction or for even explaining really technically what happened, but it's good to share the different layers of time. But probably the most important part for us is that this kind of methodology of paying attention, not only from the ecological point of view of keeping stuff, allows us to actually attend or once again democratize the service of the architect for mid-income class, you know, bringing tailor-made solutions for them and not only bringing, you know, repetitiveness in collective housing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Luis. Andrew, I believe that concludes the presentations for now, unless there was a seventh winner that I didn't know about. Everyone could bring up their video. That was incredible. It was so interesting to see the amount that you've all grown over the last 3 years of your practice and everything that you're doing, but to also just revisit your presentations through this new lens, looking perhaps forward from here, as opposed to even from where you were a couple of years ago. So I'm going to start off with a question directed at everyone, just to sort of kick things off. In part because I'm just sort of a generalist, I think sometimes. In my mind, one of the intents embedded within the prompt of value up front was to embrace, without super great concern for defining a sort of discipline, the vastly different ways that we as architects work and think. I'm curious to hear from everyone here really about how, if at all, the past 3 years have shifted your focus in the scales and contexts and boundaries that architecture might include. In other words, how might you redefine value in your practices now, acknowledging that your ways of working and positions on the outlines of your work may have shifted over the past few years? So sort of a wordy question, but sort of kicking things off. I'll put someone on the spot if they don't want to speak up.
We can do it.
Yeah.
Why not?
Evie, I was going to say, Evie, I think you should start. I think you already started to prime it
Yeah, totally.
in the way that you were talking.
Yeah, I think we're happy to. I'm sure. I don't know. For us, I think we're pretty aware of being in a kind of phase B, and kind of phase A for us as new affiliates was so much about practice, service, saying yes to everything, jumping in, kind of trying to make sense of the world of small architecture firm owners in New York City. And I feel like now we're, I don't know, in some, I wouldn't say grown up phase because we're not necessarily there, but more the point where we've figured out what is important to us. We figured out how it intersects with the city. And now we're trying to take a step back and be a little more serious about it. Kind of instead of opening up to everything as a possibility through these acts of kind of trial and error and repeats. At this point, we both through our office that we're taking on less work, we're more selective about the projects we're doing, and we're carving out more time to both of our teaching and research, and sort of trying to really not quite shift our focus, but try to hone down how these questions of value find their way into, you know, in my case at Syracuse, New York, through kind of questions of preservation and engagement in civic agencies. And I will probably wildly misrepresent Jaffer by trying to talk about his MIT course. So maybe you want to say something on that front, Jaffer. But yeah, this is where we're at.
I was going to say, just as a follow-up to that, I mean, I think that was astounding to me when you guys, these presentations were amazing, and to see kind of the new layers of information that were kind of dropped in your presentations. But Evie, also the way that it seems to be in the last couple of years, which, as you said, what began as a sort of kind of idea and a sort of will and wish really became something that was maybe defined a lot more through maybe kind of non-visual forms of building, which is building kind of networks and collaborations between agencies and various communities. I'm not quite sure, but it seems like that's a lot of, and I would say that I could see that in many of the projects in the work, the way that the projects were growing and kind of David, the way that you're looking at how even like the role of building ADUs, Formlessfinder, the way that you're thinking about, I mean, many things. I don't want to try and overgeneralize, but the way that the projects have connected to kind of global, your global networks. I think this is pretty powerful and requires a kind of broad understanding about agency rather than just kind of specific, let's say, tools and techniques. And certainly, Hannah, the way that you guys have scaled in your work is pretty astounding. But I do want to kind of continue that conversation. If somebody can share a little bit more about maybe the kind of the question that Kevin put on the table.
I'd actually love to put Garrett and Julian on the spot on that one because of the vast shift in scale.
Yeah, we're happy to be put on the spot. One thing that crossed our mind was, and perhaps this is even helpful to someone in the audience who may be wanting to apply for this award or thinking about it or starting young practice, is the admission that we applied 3 times before, right? And I think we always looked at that title, just or whatever it was in the prior years. And we're always kind of wedging what we did into that because we were fans of the award and we always wanted to be kind of part of that cohort. But then when we wrote the value proposition, when we wrote our 150 words, it did, it was easier to write. And 2, we said, oh, now I know why we didn't just feel right and this, that, and the other. And so but I don't think it was something, value is not necessarily a word we used heavily before, but we were dancing around all these topics. And I do think economics, the economics of building, for us was a big part of being in the right lane for the kind of value version of this prize. And I think we've sort of doubled down on that with the bigger scale work. And something that we're incredibly interested in is, yes, young architects you get these low budgets and you're super ambitious and you try to do something. But we've tried to not see that just as a phase, but really that as a value within our practice. Can you, I think we're very serious about that. Can you build a series of institutions at $9 a square foot by looking at architecture in a new way? So yeah, I'd say it helped us double down on it. And I think we're very thankful for that. So Julian, I don't know, I probably ran out of time, but Julian, if you have something to add, please.
I would just second what Garrett's saying, but also with Evie too. I mean, we relate. I don't know if I would necessarily claim to be more grown up, but just I think in general, something that the League Prize does that's really helpful is it kind of helps you focus your investigation in a way. I think, it sounds like Evie and Jaffer had the same experience applying multiple times, and you're always you're kind of forcing yourself to do a mini retrospective of your last year, 2 years of practice. And I think, as Garrett said, this happened to be kind of the most natural fit that we had encountered. And then it did help us kind of reframe things in a really valuable way. And I think focus and sharpen some of the terminology we're using. So.
That's great, everyone. Yeah, it was a 3 for myself. So we've
likewise here. I think it was 3 times. So yeah, also just didn't work out. I remember that portfolio. Just going back to Mira's question, I think scale does play a role, at least for us, in this question of what a value proposition is for a practice. A lot of the work that we showed initially in the portfolio for the League Prize was smaller scale experimental work that comes out of an academic context. So both Leslie and I teach at Cornell. We have research labs at Cornell. And the work translated in a kind of hands-on way into architectural scale value propositions, but they were still very much Leslie and I and teams of students and people building things sort of actively on the construction side, which produced a very kind of intimate relationship to the work. And so we found that value propositions become more challenging once the practice scales up, once the projects scale up. Conversations are bigger, different, they shift, logistics are different. The idealism isn't as easily pursuable in some of the work, perhaps. And so this is an interesting struggle that we've encountered, I would say, and we're still trying to navigate it. You know, like how does one scale up without leaving some of the values behind, because the more it's all the more important in the scaled up work to actually bring the value propositions in. So for example, we don't have a good system yet of how to scale up, for example, the use of emerald ash borer infested trees into a construction project. We would have loved to use it in the Houston house, but somehow it didn't play out. So there are kind of gaps and discrepancies as we're growing, and it's just interesting to keep in mind and to reflect upon those.
Maybe I would like to continue on that idea, because it actually reminds me to some of the work that Isaac just showed, and some of the work that we know that he didn't show is that you change the scales, and that's kind of a problem. There is a certain point in which we lose our poetic capacity when we change the scale so much, no? But then again, there is something fascinating about big architecture or large architecture in terms of size that can actually bring small things into the large, you know, and this is something that I have actually seen in Isaac's work. Like maybe you can look at a huge apartment building, but then you see the framework of concrete in a little detail or a handrail, and I think this is a nice way in which we can actually switch. Not long ago, I just read something about very beautiful book about the drawings of Louis Kahn. He used to say, you know, like it's like playing chess, you know, so you switch from clan to section, but you can also switch the scale even though it's the same project. So that's something really nice, but indeed it's a challenge, no? And I would also like to participate with the question of value. I think something really important and relevant is that value is very personal, and that maybe that's why we all got kicked off in Just, because we also got kicked off in Just. But you know, with value, it's much more easy because everyone has a certain set of values, you know, and I would say that it might not have changed that much. It has gotten enriched, I would say.
I mean, and also to add, Luis, to what you're saying, I think the context in which also Vrtical and my office works, it's relevant in the way that changes the way we conceptualize the project and the way we're close to a site. Like it's weird because each project there's completely different like rules. And in a way, I think we have to negotiate that, and probably that's where maybe value can move, no? How those different projects keep a similar trajectory, or how those trajectories start to move and like learn something new for the next ones. I think that's interesting.
I can jump in and kind of change the conversation a little bit. You know, however, kind of differently we might approach here in our trajectories, you know, how we design, how we practice, etc. One thing I think we share as a value is the problem of representation. Our daily labor depends on this. Our kind of practices, however they evolve over the years, concentrate, right, and finding new ways of mediating, new ways of talking to each other, to other constituents. And the last 2 years has been kind of interesting. And I want to bring the conversation on the value of images. I think, David, you started talking about it in your presentation. You know, studio sessions, consultant client meetings over the last 2 years, pretty much every entanglement have been mediated digitally. One could assume a loss of fidelity by the absence of physical modes of representation, but one could also finally register the demise of conventional values of representation. I'm curious to know how everyone here registers this paradigm. David.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I can start since you're right. I did mention it. It's funny. In most of my work, and not the projects I showed today, models are usually where I kind of test ideas out. Like some physical things I've always thought are like miniature construction projects that I can do in my office or studio. And so one thing that happened, of course, in the last few years was less opportunity to do that and more kind of reliance on maybe kind of just the sort of world of the virtual only. So images, drawings, etc. And the projects I showed today are probably the only projects I've done that have never had a, let's say, kind of the model as part of its own sort of thought, let's say, kind of conceptual status of material, conceptual status of form, or somehow part of that that status. And of course, both of them are currently unbuilt also, so that kind of keeps it in that space of being purely virtual. I think that the one thing that's to me happened, of course, is some things have been a lot easier to communicate and stay in touch. But it's also, I think, placed greater value on getting together and greater value on physical things that in the end is what we do as architects, no matter what we do with our images. Like, I think that at first, at least at the beginning of the pandemic, to me, it seemed like this was a great opportunity to sort of move purely into maybe almost like fully representational experimental space. But because our lives were also kind of fragmented, it seemed like at the same time, spaces of gathering and like physical pleasure seemed just as significant. And so I think like if there's one lesson I've taken from the last 3 years is that a sort of vision of the future that's only digital turns out kind of sort of just not fun. And one that still has a sort of material world or the implications of the physical world, of course, whether those are kind of global or quite palpable and physical, seems like something that as architects, which we actually have like so much knowledge to answer to and have an ability to bring, let's say, problems of representation and problems of actual things in the world together better than anybody else. And so I think like my hope coming out of this, or at least what I've seen, is that we've at least architecture is more positioned to kind of deal with this maybe schism between, even now with like AI and other things, between, let's say, the world of the unknown and the world of things that, whether we want to say digital or virtual or whatever, and the world of maybe physical things. We already know that they're not so different, that they're intersect in so many ways. But I think the problem of sociability, class, and a bunch of other things, of course, are true virtually, but I don't know. I think we've seen a desire to kind of come back to the physical world. I'm not sure that answers your question, Kutan, but I've always hoped that images, if you could make images and drawings that felt palpable or could somehow elicit the same either feelings or at least have the same kind of, I guess, value implications in terms of how you made that image or what it took to sort of produce it or view it. If you could do the same thing with images that we could do with the physical world, I think that'd be great. And probably sometimes we can, or people have. Maybe you guys have, Kutan, I don't know, but I don't know. I guess that's the lesson I've taken from the last few years as it goes to like images and things like that.
I'd love to just jump in with a quick historical point. I really agree with David, and I would say that I was actually just talking to someone about the romance of the paperless studios at Columbia in like the late 80s and early 90s, and I think historically there's been an idea for architects that the virtual is this sort of utopian realm of fantastic projection, and then it's just interesting to see now that our actual lives have migrated to the virtual. We don't really have that recourse, and hopefully it'll be good. I think there's something kind of productive about getting kicked back to the real. So fingers crossed.
I think I would echo David's comments, like maybe in a way it just really amplified the importance of the physical and the like the actual material and be able to work on site, that we sorely missed in the beginning of the pandemic. I think especially for us, because our work, it has so much to do with making our own hands and rooted in the sort of material and scales of material that we work with. We found ourselves, trying to return to labs or trying to test out, prototypes, whether they're smaller scale or at scale. And so I think in the past couple of years, also in the projects that we work with, it just sort of reaffirmed how we translate from the digital to the physical. It's a very, in a way, it's a malleable process, but one cannot do without the other. And so I think also with our, whether the wood projects, the timber projects, or the 3D printing projects that we do, I think the Kutan's points of representation is really interesting, because we found ourselves actually using less and less means of traditional drawings or representation, sometimes as a way to bypass, certain construction steps. So oftentimes we go from the 3D model directly to the fabrication, or we're using print path to actually, communicate the sort of fabrication process rather than conventional plans. And so I think in the past several years, it's been very interesting. New modes of also representation has been sort of leveraged depending on the type of work that we're doing. And some of the work that we didn't show today, but it has been embedded in the projects that we been working on, also involved with augmented reality or mixed reality and facilitating how we can work with non-standard material as well.
I mean, to follow up on what Leslie's saying, I think this notion of translation and mediums, as everyone was saying, is very interesting, because we no longer have to choose if we're like digital designers or architects, or if we do analog work. I think that gives a capacity to convey what you need to do, and in the, if fastest or more efficient way. And sometimes I have found that the most beautiful drawings are the most technical drawings that you need to give to a consultant, and it ends up being because of it's a procedure of how you produce the drawing, and not the drawing you do to present a project. And in this way of, I think, of not choosing like categories and kind of maneuvering of to get the end result, it's, it's nice to move through representations and not see them as the end, but as a way to move the project.
I think I would even put an accent to something that maybe it's not only a matter of jumping in between these technical aspects. We're also, it's funny because I think it was in the same month that we actually bought many of the hand drawing tools for technical drawing. Here on the back, we have our parallel rule and everything. I bought one for myself. I was super happy. And 2 months after, we also got a tablet to draw in plants in the, but maybe, and this reminds me of something a painter friend of mine, an artist, once told me, that he said that he rather use oil painting than acrylic because oil obliges you to wait for it to dry. So maybe it's also a matter of time. Because as Isaac was saying, maybe it is the idea behind the drawings that we're waiting for. And there is something about cheap technology and nice technology. Usually cheap technology makes everything super practical. And that's, I think that's wrong, because it gives us answers. Maybe artificial intelligence still does that, you know, but nice technology or technology that is well used actually gives you the amount of time to observe or reflect on what are you doing. So maybe it's not only about the drawings or the representation, but it also it's how you feel obliged to spend more time on doing something. And even more, in our case, we always say that we feel really happy to actually get paid for you know, coming to the studio and spend time drawing, which is something that we used to do since we were kids. So there is also a component on again, a very personal component on how we grow happy, you know, doing this kind of drawings. Like the last taxonometric that we showed, it's completely useless, but maybe it's not, because we did it after the house, of course, but there is something about us trying to speak about that makes us happy, and sharing this knowledge, you know. So there is time, and there is also happiness related to the representation. I mean, I look at David models and they look really crafted and handmade. They are really, really nice. And as he said, like going on the opposite direction. Huh?
I think this is I can tell that this group is very grounded, and there's so many kind of very authentic, I think, expressions of what you guys each individually do, as diverse as they are. And I wanted to ask something which is maybe a slightly unsettling question. I think that it's clear that the work that you guys are showing isn't all of your work, right? We all know this. There are projects that you put forward on us sort of in certain categories of work, but we also know that you guys are, you know, building practices and have all kinds of work that you're doing in order to make ends meet and to and also to participate in different conversations. And I really appreciate that. And I kind of wanted to just kind of put that out there. But I think the question I have, which is that one of the experiences kind of go back to the kind of intensity of the last couple of years that we've all experienced, and not to kind of be kind of understated, that one of the experiences I had was the sense that kind of the lights were like turned on, and like suddenly anything that you'd been working on that may have been subversive or may have been sort of a bit under the radar was suddenly like thrown into light, and that you were asked in some ways to kind of articulate all of the kind of politics of what you're doing. And I'm wondering, and in some ways that has become opportunities for many people, and to be able to bring in new conversations clearly, but also a challenge in terms of just the kind of process and culture of performance in our work. And I'm just wondering whether or not we can talk about that in kind of more openly, certainly for folks who are teachers and a part of institutions, and the kind of goal to have like these conversations around diversity, equity, inclusion, that, you know, there are good things behind it, but it's also a lot of kind of quick acting. And I'm wondering whether or not that's something that you guys can talk about in the way that you balance some of these things in your work, and also maybe some of the opportunities and challenges of that condition. Oh no.
Come on, guys.
I'm trying to figure out where to enter the question here. It's a good one. And like, I'm assuming for everybody, there's been a lot of change, of course, over the last 3 years. And I think thinking, like the field's set of values have for a long time been insisting to change. And I think at least it feels to me, I don't know if it does for others, but it feels like that the lid has broken, and those values have now like very clearly started to change towards other ones, towards maybe some things a little bit more caring about like who's in the field and how we treat people in the field, and of course how the field itself relates to things outside the field and other people. And I think that has probably been, I don't know, at least for me, a very emotional journey. And there's a lot of labor that I've done, and I'm sure others have. I know, Mira, you have, because we, of course, are part of some of the same institutions, and towards these things. And that's taken, at least for me, like there's my practice, which is d.esk, but there's also a kind of enormous amount of academic practice, which is not that, which takes up a certain amount of my effort most of the time. And I think both of those things, it's funny, like in my practice, I work kind of alone, and I think one of those things means that like I think of how the work impacts the world more than how I operate my own practice, just because it's mostly just me. But so most of those kinds of conversations have shifted into my relationship with my students and my relationship with academics in general. And it's a little bit outside of maybe kind of my sort of slightly different discussion, the way that these kinds of issues, especially as it comes to like the value of others and how to treat one another, has operated within my practice. But in the practice, I think it's much more about the kinds of work I want to do and the ambitions for that type of work, which so far have their own set of goals. But I don't know. I think like there's been probably for me an emotional labor that I hadn't, let's say, up until that point known was possible, and something I hadn't had to do before 2020, at least myself, and I know others have. It's been something that I didn't feel totally prepared for, because my expertise is not in how to sort of do an emotional kind of labor, and much more of a kind of practice labor or design labor or educating labor or something like this. And that's, I think, been really good. Like I've learned a lot, and also tried to kind of shift things towards a different form of knowledge, a different form of practice, one that is often associated maybe with things that we don't hold up high in academia, but things that are like kind of an emotional intelligence. I don't know. This is very personal. Maybe that's not the right answer to your question, Mira. I'll let somebody else jump in at this point. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I certainly don't want to stump the room. That's not the intent. But there are questions of paying labor. All of these things have become really big aspects of the terrain, and these have become important, right? And I'm just curious how that is. You can reject it and say, you know what, like it's not about we're not like performing anything. This is our work. I'm just curious whether or not there's any, I want to say maybe like positive outcomes, of having to put the dialectic between kind of the material and kind of formal ideation into contact with kind of economics and politics, which is what is clearly happening and has happened intensely last couple of years.
I mean, I think, let me jump into this. I think it's a tough question and a tough topic, because of course, it's changing for the better, but we're not the only, like, we're part of the big culture and society. And I think we have to bring this up to everyone, because we're sometimes like, you know, it's not just justification. We have to deal with this now. But I think the way, sadly, the way the world is operating, like, architects need to open to everyone and have a bigger voice, rather than only staying the voice within our discipline and our circle. For me, that's the biggest concern and the biggest way we can change these things, rather than, well, the first step is to say it between us, I think, but after, I would say it's to bring it up openly, no, and it's in process. I think that's why it's helping.
Yeah, I'm agree with Isaac, and as Liz said, our idea of doing architecture here in Mexico City is related with democratize the function of architects. So, and it's actually a little bit more complex and related with this two topics, like politician and social stuff, because, you know, we live in a complex megalopolis city, which is we don't know the you know, like, all the time try to figure out how to deal with our profession and the necessity of the client. So we try to pay attention more in the necessity and the context, and as our way to understand revalue, or the idea of value, pay attention of the existence of the things, and not just in the physical way. I mean, in an abstract idea, like the memory of a client with his grandfathers to bring the house, and more all these topics connect each other, and we try to pay attention of that, and not just our I don't know how to say, like, our way to try to do architecture, because it's just a particular idea. But if you pay attention in the other part, it's going to be easier for us. And here in Mexico City, it's easier to understand that.
Yeah, just to weigh in. I mean, it's I think it's a really important question. It's also very complex. I mean, as educators, we've been having these conversations now for a while, and it's very good and important to have them collaboratively with the students, with faculty, and with staff. But of course, there are broader implications for the discipline. I mean, I think I've always been interested in the social responsibility and role of the architect, but I think through these discourses, they have also broadened my understanding of what that means, and so what the boundaries are of architecture, and what some of our collective responsibilities could be, or how we could reframe them. So that, to me, this is still an ongoing conversation, and similar to David, it's also a very personal one. It sort of allows me to reflect on where I'm from, my own background, so my role in the world, and it's something hopefully that will generate a broader impact, but more work needs to be done.
It's an interesting question. I feel like Isaac brought up some interesting points in terms of understanding the insularity of the discipline in this. And I think, to me, at least, it seems like it's the pressing question of our time in a lot of ways. So, yeah, it's great.
And Kevin, I will also say that I really appreciate everyone's responses, and I think that I think that it's quite kind of meaningful that, in fact, that it does turn into something about one's own subjectivity and their own, like, orientation and orienting, from how you listen to a client to how you understand your own privileges to, you know, the person, that which is personal. So I think that there's something there. Thanks.
And I want to thank all of you. This is a conversation that clearly, should continue, and maybe we'll figure out some ways to pull multiple generations of winners together to do this, because I think that, what we're making and how we're making it and where we're making it carry just such increasing weight in our consciousness, and, why and for who. And I think it's been interesting to see how all of you are realizing your designs. It was super interesting to see what you're doing now. In a few cases, I was aware of it. In a few cases, I wasn't. So let's hope that we can continue this conversation in the future. And thank you, those of you who joined us. And I hope you bought a book and will tell your friends about it. And we look forward to more conversations.